But first, let's get to Canberra, where today all of the bank CEOs were called before a parliamentary committee for a good finger-wavering. Well, unsurprisingly, they all had an opinion about interest rates, but surprisingly, there was someone willing to talk about mass migration. Someone willing to talk about the issue that we have talked about for years, that we are told relentlessly we are not allowed to have a public opinion on, and that is whether Australia has got enough infrastructure for the hundreds of thousands of extra people each and every year that the current and all governments bring in. Enter the boss of the Commonwealth Bank. The Commonwealth Bank boss wants a major cut to migration levels amid housing affordability. Matt Comyn giving evidence today at this parliamentary committee. Well, how good is this?
Perhaps that number is something in the order of 180,000 per annum, gives both the Commonwealth and states the ability to plan for critical infrastructure, including housing.
Now, it was a personal opinion, but still, this is somebody outside of the political realm, a person with their finger on the pulse of Australia, somebody who is obviously the beneficiary of his financial institution having an awful lot of people that are trying to pay off a home. You would think that his automatic position would be more people means more customers means potentially more profit. No, he can see, because he sees all from what we are tapping going on our phones all the way through to the difficulties inside the housing market, and his view is united with those of us who have said for a long time the number is the problem. Now, there are other people that will want to talk about all other issues when it comes to migration on this show every time. It's about the number. It's about the idea that right now in every single state and capital city, there is a problem if you call 000 that an ambulance may or may not turn up quickly. And if it does, it's more likely that unless you are in a life-threatening situation, you'll be sitting in the back of that ambulance for a lot longer than is comfortable, more likely to end up being into a few hours' time. Why? Because there's not enough room inside the hospitals. Why? Because we haven't built ones that are big enough. If you get up early in the morning, you kiss the kids on the way out, and then you sit and squint your way on a motorway or tollway or freeway or rat run to get your way to work, to then come home later than you ever have before to yet again only have an interaction with your kids or grandkids that's kissing them on the cheek as they go to bed. Quality time is out the window. Why? Because the infrastructure does not exist that matches the surges in Australian population. 30 years ago, 18 million. Today, 27 million. Into the future, again, 30 years from now, best part of 40 to 45 million people. Again, Matt Comyn talking about the issue, particularly when it comes to issues when it comes to housing. That put simply, maybe there could be a link between the number of homes that are available and thus the number of people that you add to the queue of those that are bidding for those houses.
You need a lot of coordination between the federal and the state level. I think the sort of availability of labour, of skilled labour in and around multiple sectors, including this one, is challenged.
Now, the next task for the Liberal Party about the issues that they need to go through before Christmas to work out how they begin the fight in 2026. Well, again, we turn to the Financial Review, who seem to have a bit of an inside word on what the plan is. The coalition is looking at reducing Australia's annual net migration intake by at least, how's this, 100,000 people. So currently it's pushing, in the high 200s. They want to push it down by 100. Susan Lee seeks to placate the Liberal Party's restive right faction, who, of course, are in a battle right now with One Nation. As I told you last night, I don't think those that have flipped to One Nation are going to be flipping back anytime soon, because the more time they spend being people who want to poll for One Nation, they'll learn about One Nation, and it's a whole lot more than just immigration. The coalition will position the cut as a way to ease the pressure on housing, infrastructure, schools and healthcare, otherwise known as the Murray mix, dare I say, that we've been talking about here. As some poll shows that a majority of Australians think immigration is too high. Some polls? What about the one from New South Wales that turned up in the Channel 9 newspapers from the Resolve Political Monitor? 58% of people, when asked, Australia currently has a net migration intake of 316,000. Many settle in Sydney, Australia's largest city. Do you personally think this current level is red, too high, green, just right, or Goldilocks, too low? Who are the 5%? Goodness me, probably people who work for Treasury, because they think more people equals more taxpayers means more money they can piddle against the wall. Continuing back with the Financial Review and where the Liberal Party is when it comes to migration. Sources familiar with the Coalition's discussions said the new migration policy would focus on reducing net overseas migration potentially to below 200,000. So currently 316,000, hence why pushing it under 200,000, massive. Foreign students, non-skilled workers, humanitarian intake, all to be the potential targets. There's a whole long quote here I can show you from the part of the shadow immigrations people, but I'll leave that. Put simply, it is about housing, it is about health, it is about infrastructure. Meantime, the other side of the argument. Why do we always end up with people in power always choosing more people? Open up the floodgates, bigger Australia, bigger Australia. Well, a perfect example of that is currently playing out when it comes to Queensland. My favourite state in all of the country, the one that, as you know, if I could have blood transfusions to become a maroon, I would. Aged care demand is set to surge by 60%. Let me explain. Demographic shifts across the state are expected to trigger a projected 26,454 increase in the number of aged care beds that are needed to be delivered by the federal government by 2036-37. The lift represents an additional 5% compound increase in the number of places annually over the coming years. What does this mean? Currently, the amount of aged care facilities, aged care beds in Queensland, 44,000, on its way up to 71,000. Why do I mention this in immigration? Because here's how the Ponzi scheme works. This is the perfect example of how the Ponzi scheme works. Now, of course, previous people that have been born or brought into the country, guess what? They get to a certain point where they need aged care. That, of course, also means they are putting, quite rightfully, what is their right, which is to access Medicare for more significant medical interventions. But guess what? It has to be paid for. So unless there is about to be a giant surge in the number of people that are having babies, guess what's even better than an Australian-born baby? In terms of the government, it's a fully fledged adult who is able to enter the country, become a citizen, and then start paying tax. Why? Because the amount of people that you have to pay for as a result of the immigration decisions of 20 years ago means the tax base has to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger to pay for the previous generation of bigger and bigger and bigger. That's why we like to call it the Ponzi scheme. Because just like a Ponzi scheme requires you to fool two mates to be able to make up to pay for your part in the Ponzi scheme, that is exactly what it takes when it comes to government. That in order for whoever is the current voter, well, you need at least one to replace, most likely two, to be able to pay and pay and pay, and 2 and 4 and 6 and 8 and 10. You get the point. Good to see today what was being said specifically by Matt Comyn, the CEO of the Commonwealth Bank, but also an example about why governments are obsessed with more people coming in by the day. Still on this, can we talk about homes and home loans for a second? Because, again, the Reserve Bank is worth talking about here, because despite the fact that the Treasurer of Australia lied to everyone during the election that, despite the fact there's been 1 or 2, there'll be 3, 4 or 5 interest rate cuts, they'll all keep coming. Well, we all know that was garbage. Why? Because the Reserve Bank was being tricked as to how low the inflation rate was. Why? Because they were directly handing billions of dollars in taxpayers' money to power companies. So the bill you paid at home didn't go up by as much as it should have because of their own stupid policies. Well, today, again, in that bank briefing in Canberra, the bosses of major banks were asked a pretty simple question. Your view on where we're going to go with interest rates in the next, say, 12 months. Commonwealth Bank, our economics teams forecast the cash rate remains on hold for the foreseeable future. Put simply, no rate cut next year. Westpac, at the moment, our official forecast is that there will likely be 2 rate cuts next year. They think it'll be May and August. Hope that's the case, but there are plenty of other banks who believe it's somewhere in between, where we're talking about the in-between of 2 or 0 means 1, maybe. The Prime Minister has been in Western Australia today. He held a cabinet meeting in and around Perth. This was, of course, great expense to the taxpayer, but who cares? Other people's money. They all decided to, get their own versions of Toto 1 to fly over there to pretend that they are running the country remotely from Western Australia. But there was something that went through to the keeper last night that I know some of my mates have already talked about here, but I want to put a bit of an underline here about just how nasty and just how cocky the Prime Minister is. Oh, he's a Hawks fan this month, is he? Now, he was asked this question in relation to the long and winding road to do with things like Brittany Higgins, Linda Reynolds, whether there was a great cover-up of matters that we all have talked too much about over the past couple of years. But, of course, we all remember the real political campaign was about pretending it was a Liberal Party female problem. Now, this was a question that was asked on the behalf of somebody on the other side of the country, but it was a question asked in Western Australia by somebody from the Australian newspaper.
A federal court judge and a Western Australian Supreme Court judge found claims by Brittany Higgins of a political cover-up of an alleged rape were not just false but dishonest. Linda Reynolds and Fiona Brown were wrongly accused by your own ministers. Do Penny Wong and Katie Gallagher owe both women an apology for their central role in conflating an alleged rape with a false story of a political cover-up that has damaged so many people and cost the country millions?
Sorry, he was in Melbourne. Why? You can obviously see the Victorian Premier behind him. He is in Perth tonight, though. Now, the question, detailed, all right? And often, I will tip you off to something here. When the only opportunity to ask a significant person a question is wherever they decide to turn up around the country, yes, occasionally news organisations, and I have seen this both as reporter and an observer of press conferences, every single media organisation, from the most sanctimonious over at Channel 2 to the beggingest over there at the Turnbull Times, they will, which is somebody who's working in the Canberra Bureau will ask somebody who's in Melbourne going to the Prime Minister's press conference, hey, can you ask this question for me because I want to get what their answer is. Now, two judges in two separate states, in two separate cases, have effectively said that the idea of political cover-ups all in and around the Morrison government, all in and around the much-discussed events inside the Defence Minister's office all those years ago, well, has been proven not to be true. Now, in fact, two judges, very clear in these comments. So the Australian has been doing some work on that. They asked that question. Watch the reaction of a very cocky Prime Minister who just dismisses a person doing their job. This is low, but unsurprising from a bloke who thinks he can do no wrong.
Well, thank you for reading that question. A judge found the issue on Brittany Higgins very different from the way that you characterise it.
Now, that's just not true. Now, the reality is that any time anyone goes anywhere near any of these names, any of these words, then there's a whole bunch of lawyers that will come running and a whole bunch of people with puckered backsides at the mere conversation of this issue. But the one thing that has been very, very clear, particularly in the Reynolds case, is the concept of the political cover-up, the attempt to silence, shunk, gone, not part of the game. Yes, there have been other comments around other parts of this that have been said by other judges. I dance because I don't want to go and get dragged into a process. But I want you to know that what the Prime Minister just dismisses, firstly, as thanks for reading that question, is a smart-ass tactic. It's one, to bully the reporter and to send a message to the rest of the media, if you do that, I'll bully you too. Now, this could be considered very effective because the story is generally not reported by anyone other than the person who is reading the question. But I repeat, with my own eyes, I have seen, and I saw it during an election campaign, questions being read from phones that may well have been the wordings that have come from head office. But the Prime Minister, again, as I tell you, and as the Australian newspaper has pointed out in chapter and verse, I will save you the legal argument. Two judges, two cases, both on either side of the country come to the conclusion that the political cover-up that was much the discussion of the Mean Girls, much the discussion and guffawing and carrying on and sanctimonious huffing of the now Finance Minister and the now Foreign Affairs Minister in Senators Wong and Gallagher was garbage. It was all, of course, weaponised, and we all know, despite the lies told to the Senate about the heads-up that was being given to particular Senator Gallagher, we know all of this. But the Prime Minister also knows that if he can just pretend he was asked a completely different question than the one he was asked, and he can hang shit on the person who was asking the question because it is the one he did not want to answer, then he can behave like this. Question and answer. And remember, he knows or doesn't want to know that exactly the opposite is what should have been his answer.
A federal court judge and a Western Australian Supreme Court judge found claims by Brittany Higgins of a political cover-up of an alleged rape were not just false but dishonest. Linda Reynolds and Fiona Brown were wrongly accused by your own ministers. Do Penny Wong and Katie Gallagher owe both women an apology for their central role in conflating an alleged rape with a false story of a political cover-up that has damaged so many people and cost the country millions?
Well, thank you for reading that question. A judge found the issue on Brittany Higgins very different from the way that you characterise it.
I mean, again, keep reading the Australian newspaper, keep reading the summations of skynews.com.au, because we all know the rest of the media got the result they wanted. They black-eyed and they blew away a government that they didn't like. One that, of course, won an election they weren't allowed to win, according to them, back in 2019. This is nothing to do with the central events. It is all to do with the politicisation and the games that were played around it. 2 courts, 2 judgments of the same. And what a disgrace from the Prime Minister to belittle somebody who was, yes, asking a question potentially on somebody else's behalf. But I repeat, I have seen it, and now we're going to start to play this game. Let's watch the Prime Minister from now on in all of his press conferences, whether he points out whether the person from the ABC is reading a question for somebody else. What do you reckon the chances are? Now, I hate to burst the bubble of politicians, but they're not as famous as they think we are, as they think they are. Not a Freudian slip. But for all of us that are anywhere near the political world, the reality is there's a huge chunk of Australians who couldn't care less. There's other stuff to talk about. There's other things that are on. They're not as pumped up about it. But we know there's quite a strut that these pollies have, thinking that every single person knows about them. And whenever they go to Canberra, they are the best of the best. They are the rock stars. And I remember a poll a couple of years ago that I did smirk at when old mate Jim Chalmers used to get a little bit loose, but obviously nobody followed up on what that meant. That despite the fact that he was the treasurer of the country, 67% of people in Australia could not name the treasurer. It was early in the day, but still, I loved it. The idea that only a third could name him and 2/3 couldn't. A little reminder about how big they are very small at times. Another reminder to Australian politicians, including this time on the Liberal side of things, where in the Redbridge polling, our mate Cos Samaras, turning up in the Financial Review, interpreted in part by, again, our friend Philip Curry. People love when I say all of this, but I'll do it anyway. A little reminder here that if either of these blokes thinks that they are the automatic future for the opposition, automatically the person who can become the alternative Prime Minister, they might want to raise the profile. Because apparently 37% of people have never heard of Andrew Hastie. Now, you and I have. You and I love him, and I hope one day he's the Prime Minister. Don't confuse some of my stuff that I've said over the past few months as somebody who's not into him being a leader, the same as Angus Taylor or the same as Susan Lee, but here's the reality. When you've got about a third of the country who have never heard of you, yet 100% of it has to vote, kind of matters. Hence why, the longer you're around, the more they know. Hence why Susan Lee, who's been around for more than 20, 25 years in Australian politics, people know who she is. We also know where the polls currently are, but still, important to know. Which is why so much of the time that I have spent on the air with you, I talk about how the media plays the game. Now, this has resulted in fewer and fewer friends from the olden years of my life. It results in many a sneer and an eye roll should I go anywhere near the approved media in Australia. But the reality is that for many people, they end up being the gatekeeper. Therefore, because these are the people who write the articles, talk on the radio, bang out the thing for the online, or of course make the 6 p.m. news, many people's perceptions of politicians is read through the lens of that Praetorian Guard of people who never want to rock the boat. Hence why they treated Peter Dutton like this at the election,
Why should people vote for you when you give the air of a guy that's turned up not having turned his homework in on time?
Can you tell us how intense your fights with Barnaby are?
How can you be taken seriously in the Pacific if all of your policies alienate?
Your message to South Australian voters, particularly in Boothby and Sturt, who are watching their retirement savings be wiped away today, who are worried about you becoming Donald Trump.
Campaigns are pressure events for candidates like yourself, but they're pressure events for families of candidates too. Do you worry your dad is not being helped and might even have been harmed by the fact that he's worried about you?
Stop at all costs. Make the one you don't like seem as unelectable as possible. Intentionally create a sense of being malicious around those that you don't want to achieve power, as opposed to the one, of course, that you just carry in like they were Cleopatra.
Prime Minister, have you spoken to Premier Minns about getting the Rabbitohs into Allianz Stadium?
On those issues, though, about the polls and the momentum being on your side, are you concerned, though, about the possibility of a protest vote emerging, that people think that Labor's going to win pretty comfortably?
What does it say about your opponent? Do you think that he doesn't know the price of eggs?
We've passed the halfway point in the campaign. The polls look increasingly positive for Labor, less positive for the coalition. We must be getting confident now as we go into the final 2 weeks.
Should the Commonwealth spend anything on helping WA secure an NRL site?
First of all, what do you need toothpaste for? Do you not?
Which is why we've got to pay attention to what happened on Channel 2 last night. Susan Lee was on the 7:30 report. And there are two main ways that people interview politicians, right? The more you interrupt them is the tougher the interview. The more you let them say what they want to say. Oh, that was incredibly soft. Now, again, playing their part in the media role of trying to send the message that this is some sort of unelectable rabble because they have got rid of net zero. They have now stepped into the unpalatable side of Australian politics. As you will have heard by now, she was not given the fairest of times. Now, again, it's a tougher place. We know it's a lefty zone. There's no giant surprise there. But honestly, I get it that she'll probably end up winning an award for this, but when the host doesn't let somebody get 2 sentences out, I think we all know what's really going on here, and it's nothing to do with the subject they are discussing. You've seen it before, but why not again?
Just explain how that works when we know that it's gas predominantly that sets the marginal price of electricity in Australia. So how is it the fault of renewables? How is it that the renewable rollout has caused...
If I can just answer the question.
Energy prices to go up in Australia.
This is how. Now, I want to give a worked example of this because I come from Western New South Wales.
I think we should just talk about the
transmission project is well behind.
I think we should talk about the price of gas. You're still not accepting the facts about the economy of the economy of the energy system and actually how it works right now.
Totally,
you accept that it's gas.
At the same time, they promise
I think right now they're working on
well, yes, they are. But hang on,
policy to put more gas in the system, as you did at the election.
Isn't it a bit too little, too late?
Got the Australian Energy Council, the people responsible for this business in Australia, arguing against you.
With respect, Sarah, if you will let me finish. This is an important point, Sarah. Please let me finish.
Yep.
Now, again, I get it. The House style is the more you interrupt, the better the interview is. But every now and then you've got to say, OK, so what's your idea? Let them explain their idea. So here's the thing I thought about your idea. Here's the problem with you. I get all of that, right? But no. Let's compare that to how the golden boy, the handsome boy is treated.
Prime Minister, welcome to 7:30.
Good to be back in Canberra.
Well, and you're back with a huge majority. You've got a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to actually change Australia. We're currently watching the UK government squander the majority that they had. How do you avoid the trap of excessive caution?
With determination, making sure we are an ambitious government.
They were jokes. What were the jokes about?
The jokes were about all sorts of things. But once again, I'm going to keep that private. But he had showed a real sense of humour, and it was a very warm conversation.
All right, now let's get to Jess Wilson. You've heard by now she is the new leader of the Liberal Party in Victoria, a year out. Her hope is that being a first-term MP, being a person in their mid-30s, that this is all fresh, new and could be a circuit breaker for the Liberal Party being able to take on the Labor Party. Fingers crossed, I hope that's the case. Interesting chat that she had with my dear friend Peter Credlin earlier this evening.
We need to offer Victorians a wide-ranging agenda. We have to be talking about the fact that debt in this state is soaring towards $200 billion, and the opportunity cost of that means that we won't be able to fund essential services. I'm 35 years old. I'm a millennial. I know that my generation and generations before younger than me have given up on trying to buy their own home. And it's the punishing property taxes in this state that is making housing unaffordable. These are the issues we need to take to the next election. I believe I can do that. I can take that broad agenda and really sell an economic narrative and a broad narrative about why the Liberal Party will be a credible economic alternative for Victoria.
Now, reality in Victoria is that the Labor Party is the forever machine. They've been there for the best part of 30 years, meaning that no one wants to rock the boat. You know what I call the triangle of dependence? Well, when it comes to the debt, have a look at this. According to Victoria's budget and Victoria's Treasury, in 2024 it was $19 million a day. By 28-29 it will be $29 million a day, according to a freshwater poll, and asterisk because they said the Libs would win the federal election. 60% of people say they're doing a bad job. But let me show you exactly how the Labor Party is going to try to take this new Liberal threat on. It is by scaring the triangle of dependence. This, their first ad within seconds of her taking the job.
What do we know about new Liberal leader Jess Wilson? She leads the Victorian Liberals, the party whose last time in government saw them making massive cuts to health and education. And now they are promising $11.1 billion in new cuts. Last time the Liberals were in power, they cut $1 billion from health and waged war on our AMBOs. They cut $1 billion from Victorian TAFEs and closed 22 campuses. And now Wilson says the Liberals will cut again. Jess Wilson, more Liberal cuts.
See, this is their whole strategy, and this is the triangle of dependence in full display. Why? Now, despite the fact that they have sent the state broke, $20 billion debt is now $200 billion debt, because the majority of people have got their hand out for the welfare or are getting something from the government, or an increasing number of seats. People work for the government, or in Melbourne, some of the biggest companies, the biggest customer is the government, despite the fact that they are spending more than they are making, and any attempt to pull that down, cuts. That is the politics of Labor. That is the modern problem that we are facing in Australia. Now, that is day one. It is up to the Libs to be able to call bullshit and to fight against that perception, because you only get one chance at a first impression, and they are taking one hell of a swing when it comes to somebody who's in their first term, who apparently is quite impressive. I know plenty of people who've talked her up all day today, but the reality is they are up against the most well-oiled machine in Australian politics, being the Victorian Labor Party, who are going to say that any attempt to balance the books is somehow a way of pushing people into poverty. No. The Victorian Libs, whomever their leader is, need to hammer the failures of this mob, the unfairness of this mob, the idea that before the last election 33 people died because this government ran a 000 system into the ground, that as late as this year, the 000 system is now down to pen and paper. Time for a new broom. May this be the leader who helps arrive it. All right, last one here. As you work your backside off, and many people work all day Monday and all day Tuesday. Why? To pay for tax for the politicians, to piddle up against the wall on showbiz for ugly people. Here is how they spent your money making social media videos about themselves. First, our old mate, clueless Claire O'Neill.
This is a $5,000 apple, and 50 of them is $250,000. I've done the maths so you don't have to. Our policies will help the average young person save 8 years off the time it will take them to get into their first home.
Remember, they think everyone is dumb. We're playing right up the back of the room. We're pretending we're all on play school here. Hello, Johnny. Hello, Michelle. Do you understand our housing scheme? Here's another one, having a crack at the Libs for dropping net zero. Or another one. Remember, this is how they think Australians are interested in politics. right? That you've got to talk down to people, down to people, down to people. Patronise them by carrying on like this.
Oh, boy.
She ain't no Sabrina Carpenter.